Welcome back, listeners, to Learning from Friends. My name is Cave Curtis, your tour guide on this lovely adventure that we get to do about every 2 weeks together. It's good to see you back here. We are now into season 3. That's pretty amazing that we're looking at that we're now at the season 3 mark. And gosh, I think we're in the 60 episodes now, somewhere in the 60s. It's amazing how time flies. I want to give a shout out to my buddy Ryan Cherry for the new music. It fits nicely. It's perfect. Thank you so very much for your continual support and help for doing that. I'll probably have Ryan back on here in a little while just to discuss some music stuff. So, for our listeners, this season, just to give you a heads up, some things are going to change a little bit. I'm going to have some different guest hosts that are going to actually come on and do it. I'm going to do some more roundtable discussions like I did kind of at the end of season 2. And I'm going to change up some of the quote of the days. You know, I may have some friends record one. I may have some several different guests that maybe were previous people on the podcast coming and doing a quote of the day. I don't know. We're going to see. We're going to see what season 3 brings us. But we're at the beginning of it, so there's a lot to unpack here. But before we start, I'm going to make sure that I continue my mom just for a little bit. Mom, take it away.
My wish for you is that you continue to be who you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. By Maya Angelou.
Thank you, Mom, as always, for your quotes. It is a continual blessing to be able to have those to add into the podcast. Now, today's topic that we're going to get into is this pulls back some nostalgia for me. We're going back elementary school, middle school, high school here on a video game series that my friend Zach got me into back when we were in elementary school. Started kind of playing it. And for me, I struggle with video games, but I like the artwork. I like the style that it was laid out to. And then once I got into high school, I kind of faded out from video games. But the game is the MechWarrior series. And today, Zach is going to catch me up and catch you, the audience, up and explaining about this game series. Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
It's going to be a great day. To start out, how in the world do we know each other?
Well, we originally met in kindergarten, just basically became fast friends. I'm pretty sure our families have known us or known each other before, ages before that, because I know my mother and grandmother would constantly talk about your grandfather.
Yep.
God rest his soul.
Yep, rest in peace.
He would just pop up in conversations a little bit. And like I said, we met in kindergarten, became fast friends, spent a lot of time when we were younger hanging out with each other. I still fondly remember us just getting bored while hanging out over your house, going over to the lake next door and fishing. Or just being out in the middle of the lake in the paddle boat.
And I remember the airsoft battles that we used to have. Those were fun, running around and shooting airsoft and then just kind of sitting back in the backyard playing with all the cats and everything. Oh, such good times. I love the road that you live on. It's such a nice, calm, quiet road.
Not so much anymore. They've added quite a few more houses on it. So we actually have a few neighbors. Some of them we like, others not so much, but
that's the time.
None of them really give us any issues. So
yeah, Cherokee County's drastically changed.
Yeah.
We have, and I feel like I'm becoming an old man of, I remember when blankety blankety blank. I'm definitely one of those people that remembers that. And that's the one thing that I miss about Freehelm, Macedonia, Kent area, of families like ours who knew each other growing up. And now knowing the individual families is not the same idea because people are coming from all over the place and different changes of life. We're not going to go down that rant because that's a whole road of going down that memory lanes of challenges of what it was like whenever I grew up. And I'm only 34. So that's how kind of times change for it.
I honestly didn't know you were older than me.
Just by a little bit. Not by much. Yeah, because you're coming up on, probably by the time this episode's out, it'll be your birthday.
Yeah.
So look at that. For audience, I do record usually a month, 2 months, sometimes 3 months in advance. It just makes it easier for whenever I get caught up on with schoolwork or something like that I have a little bit of padding because there may be times where I don't get to record for a little while. But Zach, let's draw back in here. The audience, we're going to go with 98.2. I always throw out a random number. 98.2% of the audience does not know who Zach Free is. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are? Give us like a Wikipedia summary kind of idea.
Well, I've always been considered a bit of an introvert at heart. I like to jokingly say the sun doth burn me. I don't really like going outside all that often. Joking aside, though, I've usually been referred to as a bit of a quiet person. Not so much nowadays, and especially if you get me talking about something I'm really interested in. But a lot of times, like especially younger, you would find me with my nose either buried into a book, working in a sketchbook, writing something, or just sometimes staring off into space and thinking of what my next weird fixation's going to be.
And I love seeing your sketches that you've did over the years. That's always fascinated me. It was like seeing all the sketches that you could be able to do and the artwork that was out there. And
I still find it highly amusing that I failed just about every art class I was in, though.
But it didn't hit your fancy. That's the key thing at the end of the day. Art is, everybody's like, oh, the art class, it should be this or should be that. Not per se. Art is, each person has their own techniques. And if you feel bored, you're not going to do well. And that's what I have several students that I've taught over the years that like, this subject, I hate it. Then at the end of the year, they're in another one and they just pick up and flourish.
Yeah.
So that's just the way it is.
I mean, I jokingly say the whole like I failed every art class, but that's technically not true because I actually wound up graduating college taking my art classes. I got a associate's degree in graphic design, a bit of a specialization in animation. I'm not great at it, but it was fun to work with, and I actually graduated with honors.
See, that's amazing right there. Like that's having a focus and enjoy of something you love doing, continue doing it. Find a way to do it. And I just give that to everybody. There's just because you don't like this one thing doesn't mean you can't go to a technical school or a degree online or in person or a bachelor's, associates, all these different degrees. There's so much out there that you can be able to do to hone your skills. And that's the thing. And you never know where it's going to take you.
Yeah, I do know eventually I am going to try and see about turning it into a bachelor's degree from associates. It's just right now I've got to worry about funds and whether or not I can find the time to actually go back to school. Because ironically, I don't really want to go to KSU for it because their animation department, from what I've heard, has not got all that great a track record. A funny story I heard from one of my teachers back when I went to Chattahoochee Tech, Mr. Tim Mason. You are awesome, Tim Mason. I love you, man. One of the people he had in his class wound up going to KSU to continue her schooling. And one of the classes she was in, she wound up knowing more than the teacher. So KSU hired her. And I'm not positive, but as far as I know, I think she still teaches down there.
Well, that's actually a good spot right there to say, hey, if she knows more than the teacher and she's coming in, maybe that's a program for you because she got taught by Mr. Mason. So you never know.
Possibly. I mean, I could look into it.
Yeah. It never hurts to kind of contact, but that is always fascinating whenever you see that with programs. Whenever someone walks in the door and knows more than you, then you know you got a problem. But it's good to challenge the teachers, though, as well, to keep them on their toes.
Yeah, Chattahoochee Tech has an amazing design department. Like, just about all the teachers that have actually worked in the field. And Tim Mason himself and everything, he actually used to work for Turner, and he worked on Adult Swim.
That's awesome. I have to give a shout out to Chat Tech. My wife just got done this past year graduating from Chat Tech, and she was a lab technician program there. She's going to totally get angry with me for the way I butchered the name of the department or program, but great school. I mean, it's amazing. There's so many different campuses, so many different opportunities for it. And she started off here in Woodstock and then went down to Marietta, and there's like, I think 4 or 5 satellite campuses to be able to fit your time frame. And that's within itself, that's great about college.
One up the road in Woodstock.
One in Jasper.
Mountain View.
Yeah. It's great to have those because that's the thing with not everybody can go to the big monster campuses that is at KSU. Maybe you don't live the close to it, but because with Chattahoochee Tech, it's all right there in the different locations if you're in Cherokee County to be able to get to it in some way, form, or fashion. But that's not what we're here for. Let's get into our stuff going on here with MechWarrior. There's a lot of jargon, some terms and stuff that you're going to bring up. Do you have any of them you kind of want to introduce to us first before we kind of dive into the topic itself?
There are quite a few. A few of the main ones you're going to want to know are the Star League, the Inner Sphere, Succession Wars, the 5 Great Houses, clans. I may throw in some clan terms later. I'm not really sure yet because their terminology kind of gets a little weird at points. Battle Mech weight classes, Alexander Kerensky, the Cameron Dynasty, Stefan Amaris, and the Amaris Civil War. And I may give a Cliff Note version of this because it's an extremely important event in the lore and is actually what is considered by some to be the jumping off point of the main story.
Okay. And that's the neat thing is as we go through this may be I hope this turns into a 2-hour, 3-hour long episodes, just because I want to unpack as much as we can in however long it goes, how long it goes. But I'm excited for this because it brings back so many good memories of me sitting in front of my computer and trying to struggle playing this game, but loving every bit of it while I could. So MechWarrior, what really is MechWarrior, BattleTech? Is this kind of like interchangeable kind of like terms? What is it?
That is actually a mistake that a lot of people make.
Okay.
MechWarrior is actually a term from BattleTech. Some people use it a little bit interchangeably because of the computer games. The actual setting is BattleTech. A MechWarrior is a mech pilot.
Okay. It's within the same series kind of range.
Right.
Okay. So looking at what is BattleTech itself then?
BattleTech is a tabletop combat game that was originally created back in the early 1980s.
Okay.
It actually started as a kind of video game sim pod from something called the BattleTech Center. There is actually a fascinating YouTube documentary on that called Lost Tech that I highly recommend checking out, where people would basically get into pods and pilot a giant robot and shoot at each other. BattleTech spawned from that later on as a tabletop. Now, it might be the other way around. I'm not entirely positive. They kind of were very close when they came out. But the original BattleTech was originally licensed in the early 80s as a tabletop miniature combat game. They wound up having a little bit of a legal fiasco between a couple companies, one of which being Harmony Gold, which thank goodness that has been taken out of where we don't have to worry about it anymore. Harmony Gold wound up getting rights for a series called Macross, which they wound up turning into their own series called Robotech. Robotech is actually an amalgam of 3 series: Macross, Super Dimensional Cavalry Southern Cross, and Mospeada. It's basically just a series about transforming robots. BattleTech actually uses some of the models in their miniatures. For Robotech, they wound up using basically a unit called the Destroyed Defender, the Destroyed Phalanx, and several of the Valkyrie fighters, as well as one of the alien units called the Glog, which the Destroids were basically turned into the Warhammer Battle Mech, the Rifleman Battle Mech, and then the Valkyrie fighters became mechs like the Stinger, the Wasp, the Pheonix Hawk, and a few others like the Crusader, which is basically an armored Valkyrie. The Glog became the Marauder. They also got several from a few other things, like from another series called Crusher Joe, where they got units like, I don't remember the exact names of the ones from Crusher Joe, but one of them wound up becoming the Shadowhawk Battle Mech. They also actually ripped one of the tanks directly from it and everything, the Galleon light tank, and they actually use it name and all.
You know, sometimes you got to push your limits.
They wound up having a lawsuit between them for years that just kept going on and off and everything. It finally got resolved about 2 or 3 years ago, with basically being ruled in favor of the owners of BattleTech that they could continue using this stuff, because come to find out, Harmony Gold actually didn't own the rights to these mechs in the first place.
Oh.
They just didn't want anybody to use it because they didn't want to hit any of their gravy train.
Yeah, that's interesting with companies on copyrights and legalities things, and always
nowadays you can look at some of these mechs and you might see like slight influences from the originals, but they're so different now that even with the copyright issues, there wouldn't be a problem.
That's the nice thing with art and how the things have kind of changed over the years of what's available to build on is so much more than it used to be.
Back to BattleTech though, it's a tabletop combat game using plastic miniatures, 6-sided dice, a map with a hex grid system, and is usually played by 2 players, each controlling 4 miniatures each. You continue rotating between tables, doing your turns until one side is destroyed, or if you have a specific objective set on the time or on the game, that objective is complete. You can run full campaigns with this. You can either do like a one-off battle, or there are actually source books you can get for actual battles in the system that like go across multiple.
Oh, wow. Huh.
There are several different ways to play. The standard method is kind of slow going, especially if you're both sides are using full lances. Lance is a term that basically refers to both sides having 4 mechs. It is an inner sphere term.
Okay.
If you're wanting the clan version, they use stars, which are 5 mechs. Then there's also Comstar, which I will touch on later, which have level 1s and level 2s. They have 6 mechs.
Wow, you're jumping from one into the other. Man, that's a lot of combat.
A little bit. Like I said, though, the main one is very slow going because I'll just give you an example of a turn.
Okay.
All right. Both players roll initiative. The goal in initiative, you do not want to get a higher number. You do not want to go first.
So the opposite of D&D.
Right. The first player will move their mechs. And usually with the first turn, nobody attacks because...
Positioning.
Right.
Yeah.
But the second player actually has the option of attacking because once the first player has moved, the second player gets to move. Now, some players do it like moving the entire lance at once. Some do one mech at a time. I typically do one mech at a time. So they will move a mech. I will move a mech. They will move a mech. I will move a mech. Repeat until all 4 mechs have been moved. You do not want to be the first player to go because you want positioning advantage. Going second is a great way to get positioning advantage because a good example, say you have a fast light mech and you want to get behind that assault mech. So you get behind it, the assault mech doesn't have any weapons mounted on the back of it. It won't be able to shoot you during its attack phase because it can only turn its torso a certain amount.
Smart.
Then you go into the attack phase. With the attack phase, basically it goes back and forth again. One player attacks, the next player attacks. You have to roll dice for every weapon on the mech. So if you have 10 dice or 10 weapons, that is 10 dice rolls.
Are these 4-sided, 6-sided?
6-sided.
6-sided, okay.
You roll 2 6-sided. Your goal is to try and hit a target number. So say the enemy has a target number for an evasion of 4. You have to get a 5 or 6 to hit them.
Okay.
Depending on what type of weapon you're using, you may also have to roll splash damage. Like say you're using a LRM or long-range missile. Those come in slots of 5 missiles, 10 missiles, 15, and 20.
Wow.
There is a way set up and everything. You don't have to roll 1 dice for every missile.
Like every single one, 15 rolls?
Thankfully, no. They are typically grouped into 5. So the most you will have to roll is 4 times.
Hey, that's a lot
splashes.
better.
The splashes determine where it hits on the enemy mech, because every mech does not necessarily have a health bar. They have armor and internals on every limb.
Wow. So
some limbs can be destroyed and the mech can still fight. Other limbs, like the cockpit, if you take those out, it's slag.
Yeah, I always went for the legs whenever I played. Take the legs out.
Take both the legs out.
Yep.
Now, the neat thing is in the MechWarrior games, if you take both the legs out, yeah, the mech is dead. In BattleTech, if you take them both out, the mech is not necessarily dead if it can still move its arms.
Oh, yeah, because
it won't be able to move, but it can still shoot you.
And that's key. If you can be able to still move.
After that, you have the third part of the turn where both sides rectify heat from their weapon fire.
Ooh,
a lot of players do this like right after they do their weapon firing phase. And then they have to roll checks to see whether or not the mech shuts down if their heat's too high.
That makes sense. If you're shooting off something, you got to make sure that you can be able to at least be cooled off before shooting up again, because if you overheat, your mech's done.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that's neat is though, is say like a player like does their shooting and manages to kill the enemy mech. They still get to go for the next turn with that mech. Because, yes, the game is turn-based. The combat in the game technically is simultaneous. So even if your mech dies, you still get one more turn to get maybe a little revenge from the grave.
There you go. One last shot.
Now, to give you an example of this, like the other version of this game is played is called Alpha Strike.
Okay.
It is a more, I guess you could say, dumbed-down version. It's a lot more simple because it condenses the stuff from the standard character card, which a standard like character sheet is about as complicated as one sheet of D&D.
Yeah. That's usually 3 pages.
Yeah. You're lucky in this case that it's typically just 1. But you're usually having to control 4 mechs at once, so you have 4 of these character sheets. Alpha Strike condenses that into a 3x5 index card.
A lot nicer.
Maybe a little bit
more
smaller.
Compressed.
You don't have heat unless your mech has a certain amount of weapons on it, in which case you have a heat level of 1 to 4, and once you get to 4, you shut down.
Which is logical if you have tons of weapon.
Right. you don't have multiple weapons, you have a damage value, and you don't have different limbs for damage, you just have an armor and internal rating represented by little pips. And basically, it's a health bar.
Smart.
Some mechs have so many weapons on that, like, you can't actually attack with the full attack value. It will say on the card, like, what you'll have is you'll have your attack value. Like, a good example is like one of mine has like an attack value of 7.
Okay.
So at any point, it could do 7 points of damage. Then it might have next to it a +4 above the heat. That means the unit has more weapons on it than its heat can actually dissipate.
Yeah, that's not.
If you're just doing the 7, you don't have to worry. But if you want to add that +4, every plus you add ticks the heat bar up by 1 point. So you have the potential of doing 11 damage, but you're going to shut down the next turn.
Exactly. So like you're kind of hurting yourself.
It's basically juggling, maybe doing a couple points of extra damage to knock the heat up a little bit, and then taking your turn to either just fire normally, because firing normally, your heat does not go down, or taking that turn to not fire, or depending on how you play, only fire a few of your weapons. Because the way, like, there are 2 ways that I've seen this done with the damage values.
Okay.
Some people just roll an outright hit or miss with the target number.
Makes sense.
Some others roll a hit or miss with a target number for every point of damage. So, like, if you have 7 damage points, you roll 7 times. And each time you go up or above the target number, you add a point of damage.
That sounds kind of nice.
It kind of gives you a little bit of the other game, because it's like you're firing multiple weapons. So you can still do a little bit of damage as opposed to just all or nothing firing everything at once.
Now, whenever it's cooling off from the heat wave points, is it each turn it drops like 2 or 3 points, or do you roll to drop the heat damage off?
If I'm right, the heat damage roll, like, fall off on this is you take 1 turn and it either, I think it drops your heat by 1 point.
Okay.
It may drop it by all. I'm not really sure. I mean, I guess it really depends on how
you have the game set up, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing. There's so many different ways of playing all these different games.
The other neat thing about Alpha Strike, though, is the games are a lot faster because it's a lot simpler. Because you still have the same movement and whatnot, but you're not having to keep up with near as much data. So basically, move, attack.
I like the way you said that. Good rhythm.
You don't have to worry about doing heat unless you've done attacks over your heat threshold.
Yeah.
And then resolve your damage.
How long would a session last? Of like, if I were to sit down and there was like, how many people max can play?
The most I've played is with 4.
Okay.
Technically, the game is not supposed to be played that way, but I mean, it's your game. Play it how you want.
True.
As long as you've got the way you're doing everything. Like, a lot of times with the initiative for like multiple players, we just each roll a 6-sided dice, and the person with the highest number goes first, followed by the next one, the next one, the next one.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do. Now, you can set to do that every turn. Usually when we set the game up to make it go a little faster, we will just roll initiative 1 time.
Just
and
once?
then just to set the turn order, and then
turn.
that's the turn order for the whole game.
Which is smart, saves time.
Right. Now, for like a typical game, like if you're playing the standard version with the 4 full character sheets and whatnot,
Okay.
that game could take a better part of a day, possibly longer than that.
So like 12, 10, 15 hours kind of range?
Yeah.
Nice.
Now, to give you an example of, like a good example of this, I have played a full version with my buddy Scott, where we both just used 1 mech. We both used a Timberwolf with the exact same equipment. He actually beat me. I'm still pissed about him for that.
Oh, that's awesome, though.
Well, it was the way he beat me. I'll go into that at the very end.
Hey, works for me.
It's hilarious.
Works for me. I love it.
So we wound up playing that game. That game took 4 hours just for those 2 mechs. He wound up beating me by knocking my Timberwolf over and one-shotting in the head with a set of long-range missiles from point-blank range.
Well, does that not get any backlash on him with the...
No, that's the funny part.
How would... Yeah, I was saying, how will you... like?
Because we were using Timberwolves, it is a clan mech. Intersphere missile launchers have a dead zone. So once you're like at a certain distance, you can't shoot them. Clan mechs don't have that.
So you can just be able to fire and just hope for the best and go for it.
They do typically sometimes get some negatives if you're firing too close, because you have to modify the target number, because they're not really meant for that. It didn't matter. He just shot the head of my Timberwolf off.
Well, that will end a game pretty
Yeah.
quickly. That
Now,
will
on
do
the
it.
other hand, with Alpha Strike, I have played a game of it with 3 other people, each of us using 5 mechs,
So there's
20 on the
20 of us.
field.
Wow.
The battle took 4 hours.
Dang.
So, in my opinion, Alpha Strike is more fun just because you can have larger battles in a shorter period of time. And I've seen some games on the internet where people are fielding like more than just a lance. They might have a lance of battle mechs, 2 or 3 lances of tanks, some helicopters, and then the other teams have the same amount and everything. You could theoretically scale the battle up however much you wanted. You would just need a big enough map.
That's the key thing, is having a good map in order to make that space useful. Because if you're playing on a smaller field, man, you're on top of each other, and that's not going to work. Now, with your maps, what kind of areas are you typically kind of like playing in? Are you using like what? Give me an example if you don't mind.
All right. Well, there are like licensed maps and everything. I use a few of those because they just came with my box sets and everything. But like you have like a steppe desert
Okay.
or grassland. And like I said, the maps are set up into hexes because the mechs are on hex bases. So it's kind of like playing a really, really advanced game of chess with the way you're moving around. So you got like the hex the mech is standing on, and then you got like the 6 hexes around it. Usually when it comes to the mech, they're able to turn their torso. They basically, the torso range has a range of about 5 hexes around the mech. They cannot target directly behind them unless the mech actually has weapons
Built in
mounted
behind.
on its back.
Makes sense.
There are some mechs, like the rifleman I mentioned earlier, that can actually flip its arms all the way backwards and shoot behind it, but
That's legit.
it's risky because that mech has tissue paper for armor on its back, so...
Oh, fair. With the different builds, you have to kind of like find out what really is the give and take. What are you worth risking, but what's the gains from that?
Builds are fun, though, because you actually get just about full customization with the mechs. Like, I've got some that I've completely customized the weapon loadouts on.
That's cool. That's awesome. Now, how did this series find you? Like, what about it gained and maintained your attention for so long?
Honestly, I chalk it up to just a fascination with robotics and mecha at a young age. I've always had a love of learning for new things. I grew up watching a ton of educational shows. I mean, the ironic part is from about like 5 to 8, I didn't watch cartoons very much as a child. My 2 favorite shows as a child were Shade Tree Mechanic and Remodeling and Decorating.
Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's weird.
Yeah, hey, we all have our own different little worlds, man. I grew up a Nickelodeon
When I got
kid.
to about between 8 to 10 years old, he's not my brother-in-law anymore, but I still call him my bro because we jokingly say that my sister moved and we kept him. He introduced me to Japanese anime. The first anime I actually wound up watching was called New Dominion Tank Police.
Okay.
Which, I'm not going to lie, at the age I was, I probably shouldn't have been watching it. But
There's a lot of things we watch as kids that we shouldn't be watching,
Yeah.
more than likely.
And from there, like, I kind of got into it and everything. It wasn't major until I actually got introduced to Toonami.
Oh, good old Toonami. Oh, I remember Toonami. Good stuff.
You got to remember when Moltar used to host it. I was channel surfing one day, and I found an episode of Robotech. And I'm sitting there basically just like, ooh, giant robot. I want to watch this. So I've just kind of sat there watching it the whole time and just became fascinated. And then, of course, a couple years later, they started playing Gundam Wing, and I got hopelessly addicted to it.
I remember seeing all your models from that.
Because I still have them, believe me. I've actually, I think, gotten more into the models now than I used to be because it's a hobby and it's a time sink. I think I have enough model kits now to probably open a small store.
And that's a good thing, though. A hobby is something that you should enjoy and love doing.
But anyway, early on, I mostly focused on the cool robot aspect. But as I got older, I began to focus more on the stories, a lot of which is political intrigue. And a lot of these animes are technically anti-war.
Huh.
If you actually watch any of the Universal Century Gundam series, there's a lot of anti-war propaganda in it.
Intriguing. I never thought about that.
From old cartoons, sci-fi, movies, video games, and literature, much of it shaped my love of the genre. What got me into BattleTech was my brother-in-law Herb owned a copy of MechWarrior 2 31st Century Combat, which
Remember that one?
focuses on the clans.
Yeah.
I remember the one I think you focused on a lot was MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries.
Yep. That was the big one.
I think you did play 3 as well.
I played 3. Yeah.
I would watch him just play it because it's basically a sim game where you just in giant robots stomping around shooting stuff. And one day I just asked him, can I give it a try? And the rest is kind of history.
Did you ever use the joystick, or were you just kind of like with the finger tapping?
Always use the joystick with the old ones. The ironic part is the latest one, MechWarrior 5, I swear by keyboard and mouse.
Hey, that you never know.
I
Risk
do
kind of the
have
big
a
thing there.
HOTAS joystick and have used it with it. A HOTAS is a joystick and throttle. It's basically what you'd use in a simulator to fly an airplane. But
Wow.
it works great for piloting a mech too.
Hey, it's similar kind of layouts, I bet.
A little bit. I mean, it was a bit of a pain to set the thing up because when the game originally came out, they didn't actually have like full support for it. So you had to basically edit a notepad document.
In order to make it work.
I had to learn a little bit of basic coding to do it.
Look at that. At an early age and still growing strong with it. Love it.
Oh no, this wasn't from a child and everything. This is something I wound up doing probably within the last like 2 years.
Oh, I thought we were talking about further
The
backwards.
old games, like, yeah, they use joystick and everything.
Yeah.
I use the joystick with them because, like, my favorite one, MechWarrior 4, I used the joystick with it religiously. I actually, I guess a couple years back, I found the exact same joystick I used to play MechWarrior 4 online, so I bought another one.
So we got a little bit of background on like the base of what MechWarrior was like kind of put around. What's kind of our difference here? We discussed a little bit about it, but what's some of the differences between BattleTech and MechWarrior from going from the tabletop game and the stories into MechWarrior itself?
All right. MechWarrior is a focus on basically a single character piloting a battle mech,
Okay.
whereas BattleTech is more of the general setting.
Okay.
Splitting between the two games because there actually is a BattleTech game.
Oh,
That-
okay. I didn't know that.
It is actually a turn-based strategy game that is heavily based off of the tabletop, so it plays almost identical to it.
See, that's nice. I like that.
Unlike MechWarrior, though, where you're controlling just one player and everything, and either like if you're in like the normal ones, you're just playing through the story mission by mission, or if you're in Mercenaries, you're doing mission by mission and trying to keep your mercenary outfit funded,
Okay.
buying new mechs, buying new weapons, salvaging stuff that you blow up on the battlefield. That's another major aspect of BattleTech is a lot of the tech in it is not new,
Okay.
especially in the beginning of it. That does change a little bit, but the entire setting is kind of a world of stagnation.
How so?
This actually gets into basically what kicks it off. I mentioned earlier Stefan Amaris and the Amaris Civil War.
Yes, you did.
This basically what could cause something called the fall of the Star League. Now, the Star League was a major government body that was basically a united intersphere front, with all 5 of the great houses basically voting on a title of First Lord.
Which I promise we'll get into those houses in a little while.
Now, the First Lord was a guy by the name of Richard Cameron.
Okay.
Stefan Amaris was one of his advisors. Richard looked up to him a great deal, and it cost him his life. Stefan, in a rather intriguing power play, one day walked into the throne room, presented Richard with a jeweled-encrusted laser pistol, picked it up, blew his head off.
Well, that's intense.
Yes, the setting can be very violent at points.
Fair. That's when you were talking about some of the kind of political statements
Right.
kind of going in there.
This set off a war that lasted years. One of the major commanders of the Star League was a man by the name of Alexander Kerensky. Basically, he wound up fighting between him and the Amaris faction, because Amaris basically put himself up as the First Lord of the Amaris Empire.
Mm.
The battles lasted for years. Kerensky eventually managed to finally take back Terra, which is the name of Earth in this setting.
Okay.
Found that Amaris had not only shot Cameron in the head, but had killed the entire Cameron family line, left their bodies in the throne room, and sealed it off. When Kerensky
Dang.
saw this, he basically marched Amaris and his entire family out and executed them via firing squad. He then donated Amaris's body to one of the hospitals in this thing so that everyone could see what a despot and tyrannical leader could look like from the inside and out.
You know, that's a good way to a good way to show
He did
that.
not want him to become a martyr.
Oh, fair play. That's a
After
very political
this, a lot of the higher ups in the Star League, like Defense Force, the SLDF, were so traumatized by the battle and Kerensky himself that he decided he didn't want a battle like this to ever happen ever again. But it was the Star League's fault that it happened because they had been putting pressure on a lot of things throughout the Inner Sphere to the point where it kind of boiled over. If they had actually not done it, the Amaris coup might have been avoided. But at that point, it was too late.
Yeah, whenever you get that far.
What did Kerensky do? He gave his followers a choice. They could stay in the Inner Sphere or they could leave. A good portion of the Star League Defense Force left with him. And they left the Inner Sphere and basically went on a 1-year exodus journey before finding the Pentagonal Worlds.
Okay.
That led to the founding of the clans later on. So when you hear me talk about the clans are actually the remnants of the SLDF that are coming back to the Inner Sphere. But they're...
After the 1 year...
Oh no, it's
longer.
far past that.
Okay.
It took them a year to get to the Pentagonal Worlds.
Okay, gotcha.
The clans don't come back for nearly 400 years. That's a lot of time to change. After the fall of the Star League, it basically led to a series of conflicts called the Succession Wars, where the 5 great houses, Lyran Commonwealth, Capellan Confederation, Free Worlds League, Draconis Combine, and Federated Sons basically duke it out for the title of First Lord. Nothing really comes from it because they're all basically about equally matched, so it basically just tears the Inner Sphere apart. Their liberal use of nuclear weapons, some worlds are completely rendered inhospitable and dead.
Only when you're adding that kind of weaponry and stuff into an area, and you're wiping out all this, yeah, you know, it kind of makes sense that it's
the atrocities that happened were so vast that it led to the Ares Conventions being created, which basically outlawed bombarding of planets. Some of the groups didn't sign them, but for the most part, they did.
And I can see this totally being a big basis for, you know, understanding of the political atmosphere around the back on what one small event can trigger hundreds and hundreds of years as results afterwards.
Right. Now, as of the time that the game kind of starts, which usually a lot of people consider the starting to be around the year 3000 to 3015, there have been 3 succession wars. No one has won them. They have all ended in stalemates. The 4th succession war technically ends in a reborn Star League.
Okay.
But it doesn't last for very long because people are people and people are dumb.
You know what? There was a quote, I can't remember who exactly said it, but the world is great. There's only one problem, the people in it.
Yep.
Can't remember who said that. For some odd reason, I feel like it was a cartoon character. It doesn't click back to me on it. So doesn't a lot of this actually come back to like a book series?
It's actually several book series. Now, the one I'm going to recommend is what is considered the original book series. It's the first ones that came out. They are the Grey Death Trilogy.
Okay.
They're written by William H. Keith Jr. and are considered a great primer to get into said universe. Now, when they originally came out, they weren't really great, well-written. They had a lot of typos because, like, this is back in the 80s. Some books had low-quality control.
Yeah.
The first book, Decision at Thunder Rith, was originally published in 1986. It's about the trials and tribulations of Grayson Death Carlisle and his mercenary unit, the Grey Death Legion, which he inherits from his father after an attack on their home base on planet Trelwan. Taken from the summary on the back of the book, 1992. 30 years before the clan invasion, the crumbling empires of the Inner Sphere were locked in the horror of the Third Succession War. The great houses, whose territories span the stars, used battle mechs to smash each other into rubble. Grayson Death Carlisle has been training to be a mech warrior since he was 10 years old, but his graduation became sooner than expected when his friends and family died and his father's regiment destroyed. Young Grayson finds himself stranded on a world turned hostile, and now he must learn the hardest lesson of all. It takes more than a battle mech to make a mech warrior. To claim the title of mech warrior, all he has to do is capture one of these giant killing machines, if it doesn't kill him first. And I highly recommend these books. Mr. Keith is an amazing writer. You can also find the books on Audible.
Oh, cool. That
I
definitely goes a
bought
long
them
way.
through Kindle, but you can probably find physical copies of it. The company that currently owns the BattleTech IP, Catalyst Game Labs, I believe they sell reprints of the books now, like in hard copy, if you just really want pages between your hands.
Yeah, a lot of people do still like to have that physical
Now,
touch.
another book series that I have read, it takes place probably about, well, I know at least the last book is about 40 to 50 years after the Great Death Trilogy.
Okay.
And it is the legend of the Jade Pheonix, which the books are, I'm trying to remember the names of these books. The first one is called Way of the Clans. And it's the story of a clan warrior by the name of Adian, who later becomes Adian Pride. Now, clans are weird about last names. You actually have to earn one in combat. They're not born with them, because a lot of clan warriors are created through something called Trueborn.
Okay.
Freeborn is basically sexy time, have baby. Trueborn, you're born in an artificial womb. They
Interesting.
consider artificial womb born or trueborns to be superior to the freeborns because it's basically genetic engineering.
Yeah.
The clans have a little bit of eugenics in their thing. Just fair warning about that if that's a topic that bothers you. Because to an extent, some of their society is a bit fascist. They have a caste system.
Interesting. Huh.
And the warrior caste basically dictates everything. There are a couple clans that are a bit more progressive than that, but for the most part, it's generally par for the course. Warrior caste are in control.
Makes sense if you've got all the weaponry and you've got the stuff to be able to kind of put down a riot or put something out.
Pretty much.
Be able to do it.
But like I said, we can go into the clans a little bit later. Right now, I'd rather focus on the Inner Sphere because they're the ones that we really need to focus on in this particular time frame. Because like I said, the clan invasion doesn't happen until the year 3049. And there are running jokes about it, which I will get into in a little bit, that they're just chef's kiss hilarious.
I love it. I love it. On that note, that is the perfect place to take a pause. When we come back next time, we're going to actually start jumping into the game a little bit more, talking about what consoles it could be found on, what's the premise of the series, some of the elements of the game, the 5 great houses, and some more of the background on the mechs. So I hope that you're able to come back in with us next time and enjoy more of this conversation with Zach, because it is amazing to be able to get to spend this time with Zach today. If you would like to reach out with me, you can be able to contact me at Cade, which is spelled Cade, at learningfromfriends.com. I also can be reached through Facebook. I have a Facebook page. I have a Twitter page. I rarely use it, but it's there. And I have a Patreon page. If you would like to be able to contribute, that would be deeply appreciated to be able to help fund this podcast, because, again, soak in tons of hours to be able to make this stuff for you guys. And I like to keep it free because I can control the content and make it kind of for you guys the best ways possible. So with that, if you have the opportunity, share all this with your friends, put it on any social media page. Just best of all, use it by word of mouth to be able to share it with others. I thank you all for sticking around with us. And to end us out here, my name is Cade Curtis, your tour guide on this lovely adventure that I like to call Learning from Friends. And most of all, don't forget to let your curiosity fly high.